Week, more than just impeachment. The White House reached a phase 1 trade deal with China. The Department of Justice Inspector General released a polarizing report on the FBI's Russia investigation. Congress may even have a deal to avoid a shutdown. Wow, a lot of stuff. Michael Starr Hopkins is with me. He served on both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's campaigns. And we also have Republican strategist Joseph Pinion. Gentlemen, I promise we will talk about other things, but we have to start with impeachment. Joseph, let me start with you. Mitch McConnell said that he's working very closely with the White House ahead of a potential Senate trial. A lot of people might be saying, wait, hold on a second. You might be a potential juror here, so to speak. The president is the defendant, so to speak. Is this a conflict of interest?
I mean, it's always a conflict of interest. If we're talking about a court of law, people would be looking to, have people disqualified. But I think, again, this is inherently a political process. That's what impeachment is. I think we saw this with the Clinton impeachment. We even saw some of it leading into Nixon. So, I mean, ultimately, the notion that somehow that McConnell was not going to be working with the president, I think, is really not rooted in reality. And ultimately, we're really setting the stage here for what will be a political showdown of, momentous importance.
Michael, Congresswoman Val Deming said that McConnell needs to recuse himself. Do you agree with that?
He does. I mean, if he's going to sit and meet with the White House lawyer and try to speed up this trial so there's no witnesses, then I think he should recuse himself. The American people deserve to know what happened. They deserve to know what's going on. And I think Mitch McConnell's going out of his way to stop that. And the question needs to be, what's he hiding?
I don't really think anything is being hidden. I mean, the reality is that we've had a kind of month-long process. Unfortunately, I think, again, I think we have to separate the merits of impeachment from the effectiveness of what Democrats have done. And so I think when you look across the board, I think Democrats spent a month trying to make Americans learn Latin. Turned out that didn't work. Then we went over to...
We're not into quid pro quo. We don't want to hear that. Make it simple.
Right. Then we went on to bribery. Now we're back to even people talking about Russia. So, again, from 2017 even to now, we've had all these different iterations of arguments as to why President Trump is either illegitimate or should be removed from office. And I think for many Americans, it's very hard for them to follow the thread.
So let me ask you this. We talked a little bit about the Democrats. How has the Trump administration handled this so far? If you had to give them a grade, what would it be? How have they done?
I think they've actually done a pretty poor job, if we're just being brutally honest.
Okay.
I think President
Would
Trump
you give him an F here?
No, yeah.
All right.
Look, I think if
you're talking like C minus. Are we passing? Are we passing? Or are we failing here?
Look, I think they're definitely getting the passing grade, particularly because I think Democrats have been able to allow them to grade themselves on the curve. I think right now I go to see my grandmother at the elderly home. I've got senior citizens ask me, when do I get my Young and the Restless back? This is a real thing. So again, I think there is fatigue here with the American people. I think when you saw coming out in these hearings, yes, there is an abundance of smoke there. But when you come down to the fact-based witnesses, none of those fact-based witnesses said President Trump told me specifically they get no aid if I get no dirt.
Well, I just got to interrupt you for a second, because part of that is because they haven't allowed Mick Mulvaney to testify, Bolton to testify, the people who would be fact-based witnesses who are actually there. Well, the White House has blocked them from being able to give those answers.
Define block, because again, the Democrats
cannot testify.
Well, the Democrats could have gone out there. They subpoenaed Bolton, then they withdrew the subpoena. They could have taken this through a legal process and said, look, we're going to go to the courts to get a definitive answer on, we need to have Pompeo come down here. We need to be able to have Rudy Giuliani come here. They could have decided to go through an extended process to do that. They didn't. And I think that's also why I always say there's a little kernel of truth in everything that President Trump says, because when he says it's flimsy, no, the entire process was not flimsy. But the fact that we've gone again from Russia to this process, through quid pro quo to bribery, and now have arrived on two things that don't include any of the things that Democrats have been talking about this entire process, it's all because of the fact that they have rushed through this process for political reasons.
Then, Michael, let me ask you, do you think that the Democrats, would you give them a passing grade? Did they do a good enough job trying to get all of these witnesses to come forward?
Absolutely. I think Democrats have done everything they could have outside of going to the courts. But to go back, but to go to that point, the criticism of Russia was that it took too long. The process was too long.
Okay.
Now you guys are complaining that this is going too fast. We know that the White House intentionally wanted Democrats to go to the court so that then this would go until until June or July, in the middle of the presidential election.
Right.
We're trying to avoid that. We don't want this to go on in the middle of a presidential election.
Well, I think, again, as I said before, Democrats want to have their impeachment cake and eat it too. And so, again, they want to be able to go through the process to say that, look, it's clearly clearly apparent that President Trump is corrupt, and therefore you have to take our word for it, instead of being able to go there and prove on a factual basis that they've been able to hear straight from the horse's mouth that the things that he did were impeachable. And so again, it's almost this kind of dual track they're on, where they're trying to say, yes, the president did get on the phone and say, give me my dirt or you get no money. But at the same time, none of the witnesses that have come forth has said that. And I think I understand what you're saying, that yes, is it better for the American public that we're not going through impeachment at the same time we're having an election? Absolutely. But is that what the process deserves when we're talking about overturning the will of the people for the first time in the history of this nation?
That's not
I would submit to you that it's not.
Hillary Clinton doesn't become president if Donald Trump.
Well, I think when you're talking about the fact that in the history of this nation, the nation that's had a civil war, or a nation that's gone through the civil rights movement, that we have never gone out there and said that we are going to actually remove a president from office, I think that is momentous.
Nixon left because he knew he was going to get removed from office.
Well, look, I think Nixon is wholly different from the Trump issue. I think that, again,
because it was a domestic issue, whereas this is a foreign issue.
Do you really think that's what makes a huge difference here, that this would be different if this was a domestic issue?
I think this is an even more serious issue, whereas Nixon and the Watergate plumbers went in and were stealing information from the DNC. Here, Trump has basically asked a foreign government to do what the White House plumbers were doing. And that in and of itself should scare everyone.
And do you think that's why we're having trouble understanding it, though, because it wasn't done on our soil?
Absolutely. I think it complicates things. And I think, as you mentioned with Russia, it becomes a once again conversation about, a foreign country and meddling. And I think it just kind of it gets murky.
Well, again, I just to push back a little bit, I said, look, there is much evidence that I think if people were placing bets in Vegas, they would say that, yes, there is evidence that it is likely that the president may have gone out here and said, I need dirt in exchange for this aid. Yeah. But the only thing that we know for certain is that the aid was withheld for a White House visit. And arguably, administrations do things like that all the time. And so the issue becomes the thing that Democrats are seizing upon to say that this is impeachable, which I think even some Republicans would say if that were to come out, then we'd have to actually take a pause, that there was an exchange in aid for dirt. They haven't actually had fact-based witnesses come forth to do that. And I think the fact that they, one, haven't had a witness do that, and then two, beyond that, haven't actually been able to go through the court process, the legal process, to substantiate the fact that there's also this obstruction occurring, I think makes the argument weak in spite of all the things that Democrats love to point at, which, again, have not been substantiated as fact.
All right, can we agree on one thing here? That we could talk about impeachment all day long.
All day.
But let's give the people something else for a second, because I did promise we were going to talk about something else. All right, we had some really, really big trade news this week. Hearing today that the China trade deal, the Trump administration, that we're at phase one with China. Also, earlier this week, UCMA.
I always trip over it whenever.
I keep thinking that I'm going to say USMMA, and I'm going to be talking about mixed martial arts here, and people are going to go, what are you talking about? All right, those were some pretty big announcements. How important was it to make some progress on the trade front this week, and who was it most important for, would you say, Michael?
I actually think it was really important for both sides. I think it helped Democrats because it shows that we're trying to push legislation through while also impeaching the president. And that's been one of the knocks from Republicans, that we're singularly focused. And I think for Republicans, I think it also was helpful because it changed some of the narrative.
Was this an essential for President Trump?
No, I think it was.
Why not?
It was critical for Democrats. I think, again, when you look at a place like Wisconsin, where all of a sudden you see Trump has perpetually been underwater, basically since inauguration. And now, after this long process of impeachment, you see him basically beating all of the Democratic candidates, in head-to-head lineups. I think Democrats needed to show that, hey, there's still work getting done here, because I think the outcome from impeachment is actually not going to be in their favor when it comes to the hearts and minds of the American people.
I always remind my Republican friends, Democrats have put up 400 bills that are now sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Whenever he decides he wants to put them up for vote, we would gladly love for that to happen.
Well, look, I think I hear you, but the point of government is for,
I hear you, however,
is to pass bills and that actually can become law. And I think that if you want to, even if you can go back to previously where we had Boehner, trying to get bills passed, wasn't really working well for him. So look, I think the hallmark of effective government is how can you find ways to find common ground with the other side. I think that the Democrats in many ways have actually gone out of their way to pass bills to act as if they're doing things, knowing full well those bills didn't have a snowball's chance in anywhere to get passed.
But I'm trying to think, was it actually last week? Yes, last week when President Trump said he might wait until after the 2020 election to get a China trade deal done. Could he have gone into the November election without China handled?
I believe he could.
I think I have a feeling this guy's going to disagree.
Here's what I will say.
Don't you think people would have tired of the trade war by then?
people are tired of the trade war, and I think, again, when you talk about elections, if people have to go back to school shopping, and again, the money that we talk about, extra money in people's bank accounts, because we have 6 million Americans who have jobs under Donald Trump that didn't have jobs before he took office. If those jobs end up acting like the bank account's still empty because sneakers cost more, because book bags cost more, it would have been a very serious problem for him. So I think to that point, if he didn't find a way to at least get a stalemate in the trade war, he would have been in trouble, because that is something, again, if it's the economy stupid, then it's certainly about how much money is in your bank account.
There's a lot of farmers all across this country who are suffering under the trade war. Defaults for mortgages for farms are at a historic high.
Right.
So I think when you head into the election, you would start to see movement among some of those people who voted Obama twice and then voted Trump. And I think that movement would be headed back towards Democrats without a trade deal.
All right, let's talk about one other issue here that is not impeachment. The DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz's report out earlier this week. Again, it feels like, a lifetime ago. It's almost old news.
It is.
But, Michael, let me start with you. Who do you think that was most important for or most damaging to?
I think it was good for institutions. I think it showed that while there were some issues in the FBI, which I think we would all admit, that overall the FBI did what it was supposed to do. And I think that there were lessons that we can take from it. And I think my buddy over here is probably going to disagree with me a little bit.
I could see him making a face, and I could see you seeing it too. I mean, look, Horowitz said, though, it didn't vindicate anybody. No. Did it vindicate anybody in your mind?
No, I think it pointed out the flaws in the system and that we can fix those flaws. But I think it showed that overall, there was a reason for that investigation to start.
Look, I said earlier this week, I think that for individuals who have always been skeptical of FBI power, for those same folks who were concerned about a Black Panther movement that was undermined by an FBI, for people that were concerned about Dr. King being investigated and hunted down by J. Edgar Hoover, if you're talking about even today with Black identity extremism, these ridiculous reports coming out of the FBI that seem to target communities. If you're somebody who was skeptical then you should be appalled by the notion that an attorney for the FBI literally fabricated evidence, basically did his best
and got fired.
I don't think that's really the point. This is basically.
But it is part of the facts.
This is basically like Foreman sprinkling blood all over a crime scene, right? If you're talking about the fact that this attorney for the FBI manufactured evidence, and then that evidence got used as the basis to get a FISA warrant for an investigation into a person who became president of the United States. The idea is not about the fact that the investigation was started poorly. The fact that if an investigation of such importance could go so completely off the rails and become so lawless into someone who, again, is the president of the United States, what in God's name is happening to the average person when we talk about the actual prosecution rates for average Americans in federal court?
We have to go, gentlemen, a yes or no from both of you. Do you think it will change the FBI?
Yes.
Do you?
Unfortunately, no, because we have a lot of evidence that says it won't.
All right. Gentlemen, this was an absolute pleasure. Great to have you running through the week. I think this is becoming a tradition here on News Now, our Friday Wraps.
Friday Wraps.
Michael Joseph, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.